The crash and first contact, the emergency klaxon screamed through the cockpit of the transport vessel Horizon's Edge as Marcus Chen fought to keep his ship steady. Red warning lights bathed everything in an angry glow, while the navigation computer displayed a cascade of system failures. His hands moved frantically across the control panel, but nothing responded the way it should. Come on, Marcus muttered through gritted teeth, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cabin's cooling systems. The planet below grew larger in his viewport, its surface a swirling mass of purple storms and jagged mountain ranges. This wasn't supposed to happen. The routine supply run to the outer colonies should have been simple, but space never cared about human expectations. The ship's AI spoke in its maddeningly calm voice. Hull breach detected. Engine failure imminent. Recommend immediate evacuation. Procedures. Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. Evacuate to where? His escape pod had been damaged in the same meteor shower that crippled his main engines. The only choice was to try for a controlled crash landing on the unknown. The world below, the atmosphere, hit his ship like a giant's fist. The Horizon's Edge bucked and rolled as atmospheric friction tore at its hull. Marcus strapped himself in tighter and aimed for what looked like a relatively flat area between two mountain peaks. The ground rushed up to meet him faster than he'd hoped, and the last thing he remembered was the tremendous crash of metal against stone. Marcus woke to the sound of howling wind and his own labored breathing. His head pounded like someone was using it as a drum, and his left shoulder felt like it was on fire. But he was alive, which was more than he'd expected when he'd seen that planet rushing toward him. The cockpit was partially crushed, but he managed to squeeze through the shattered viewport and stumble outside. The alien world hid him with a wall of sensations. The air was thick and humid, carrying scents he couldn't identify. Purple lightning crackled across the dark sky, and the wind carried an odd metallic taste. In the distance, something roared, not mechanical, but alive and angry. Marcus grabbed his emergency pack from the wreckage, checked his supplies, and tried to get his bearings. His communication equipment was dead. The beacon wasn't transmitting, and his location scanner showed nothing but static. Marcus was completely alone on uncharted world, with no way to call for help. The realization should have terrified him, but instead it sparked something stubborn in his chest. He'd survived the crash, and he'd survive whatever came next. The first priority was shelter. The storm clouds gathering overhead looked like they meant business, and he could hear more of those disturbing roars echoing across the landscape. Marcus picked a direction and started walking, his boots crunching on the strange, crystalline sand that covered the ground. He'd been walking for about an hour when he spotted the cave. It was set into the base of a towering cliff face, partially hidden by twisted vines that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The opening was large enough for him to walk through comfortably, and it promised protection from both the coming storm and whatever was making those sounds in the distance. Marcus approached cautiously, his hand on the plasma cutter at his belt. The mouth of the cave was dark, but his flashlight revealed smooth stone walls that stretched back into shadows. There was something strange about the entrance. Scratch marks in the stone that looked almost deliberate, and a collection of bones arranged in what might have been a pattern. But with the first drops of alien rain beginning to fall, he didn't have the luxury of being picky about his shelter. He'd made it perhaps 20 feet into the cave when he heard the growl. It was low and threatening, coming from somewhere deeper. In the darkness, Marcus froze, his heart hammering against his ribs as he slowly raised his flashlight. The beam swept across the cave walls, revealing more of those deliberate scratch marks, until it finally settled on a pair of eyes that reflected. The light like mirrors. They were large and golden, set in a face that was definitely not human. The creature stepped forward into the light, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. She was tall, maybe 6 feet, with a lean but powerful build that spoke of speed and strength. Her entire body was covered in short, dense fur that shifted, from silver to blue depending on how the light hit it. Her face was elongated, almost wolf-like, but with an intelligence in those golden eyes that was undeniably sentient. She wore simple leather wrappings around her torso and waist, and her hands ended in claws that looked like they could tear through metal. A long tail swished behind her as she studied him, and her ears, pointed and mobile, swiveled to track every sound he made. Marcus raised his hand slowly, hoping the gesture would be understood as peaceful. "I'm not here to fight," he said quietly, keeping his voice as calm as possible. "I just need shelter from the storm." The alien female tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. She sniffed the air, her nostrils flaring, and took another step closer. Marcus held perfectly still as she circled him, always staying just out of arm's reach, her nose working constantly. Then, without warning, she lunged forward. Marcus tensed, expecting claws or teeth, but instead she grabbed the front of his shirt with surprising gentleness. Her claws easily parted the fabric, and she stepped back with the torn garment in her hands. She held it up to her face and inhaled deeply, her eyes closing as she breathed in his scent. "Okay," Marcus said slowly, trying to process what had just happened. "I guess you can have that." The alien female opened her eyes and looked at him again, but the wariness was gone. She held his shirt against her chest and made a sound that was almost like a purr. Then she turned and walked deeper into the cave, glancing back at him as if expecting him to follow. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then decided he didn't have much choice. The storm outside was getting worse, and this strange creature seemed more curious than hostile now. He followed her into the depths of the cave, his flashlight revealing a surprisingly comfortable living space. The cave opened into a larger chamber with a natural chimney that drew smoke upward. Animal hides covered the floor, and there were clear signs of long habitation, tools, containers, and what looked like artwork carved into the stone walls. The alien female had made herself a home here, and it was clear she'd been alone for a long time. She arranged his shirt carefully on a pile of furs, then turned to watch him again. Marcus set down his pack and tried to figure out what to do next. The universal gesture for food seemed like a good start, so he pantomimed eating. She understood immediately, disappearing into a side chamber and returning with what looked like strips of dried meat. The food was gamey, but not unpleasant, and Marcus was hungry enough not to be picky. As he ate, he studied his unlikely host. She moved with fluid grace, always aware of where he was, but no longer treating him as a threat. When she caught him looking, she didn't turn away. Instead, she seemed to be studying him just as intently. "I'm Marcus," he said, pointing to himself. "Marcus." She tilted her head, then made a sound that was clearly an attempt at his name. It came out more like Marquez, but it was recognizable. Then she touched her own chest and said something in her language that sounded like Nira. "Mira," Marcus repeated, and her ears perked up at hearing her name pronounced correctly as the storm raged outside. They sat across from each other, and the firelight, two beings from different worlds trying to bridge the gap between them. Naira kept glancing at his shirt, and Marcus began to understand that his scent meant something important to her. He'd heard of animals using scent to mark territory or identify pack members, but this felt different. More personal when exhaustion finally began to pull at him. Marcus arranged some of the furs into a makeshift bed near the fire. He expected Naira to retreat to her own sleeping area, but instead she picked up his shirt and curled up nearby, holding the fabric close to her face like a comfort item. Marcus lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm outside and the soft sounds of Naira's breathing. He was stranded on an alien world with no hope of rescue, but somehow he didn't feel afraid anymore. The dangerous predators and toxic storms were still out there, but he wasn't facing them alone. When he finally drifted off to sleep, his last conscious thought was the sound of Nira's contented purring, and the strange realization that he felt. Safer in this cave with the alien stranger than he had in months of routine space travel. The second day began with Marcus waking to find Naira gone and his shirt tucked carefully beside him. The storm had passed, leaving the cave entrance bright with alien sunlight. He could hear movement from deeper in the cave system, along with sounds that suggested she was preparing food. Marcus stretched, working out the kinks from sleeping on stone, and took stock of his situation. His shoulders still ached, but it was manageable. His supplies would last maybe a week if he was careful. And he had apparently been adopted by an alien huntress who seemed to think he belonged to her now. The thought should have been terrifying. But Marcus found himself smiling instead. He'd spent his whole adult life moving from one assignment to another, never staying anywhere long enough to form real connections. Now he was stranded on a world where the only intelligent life form he'd met had claimed him based on nothing more than the smell of his shirt. Naira returned with fresh meat and some kind of fruit that tasted like a cross between an apple and a mango. She'd also brought water in a container made from what looked like a hollowed gourd. As they shared the meal, Marcus began to notice the small ways she was taking care of him. The best pieces of meat were placed within his reach. She tested the fruit before offering it to him. And she never let him get too far from her sight. It was clear that in her mind, he was now part of her territory, something to be protected and provided for. The realization was both humbling and oddly comforting. Marcus had never had anyone take care of him like this, and he found himself responding to her attention in ways that surprised him. When she brought him a salve made from plant oils for his injured shoulder, he didn't protest when she insisted. On checking his wounds, he let her gentle claws examine the cuts and bruises from his crash. And when she retrieved his shirt again and pressed it to her face with that same expression of contentment, he began to understand that whatever was happening between them went beyond simple hospitality. By the third day, they had developed a routine. Naira would hunt in the early morning while Marcus organized their supplies and tried to repair what he could from his crash. She would return with food and they would share the meal, after which she would work on various tasks around the cave while he explored the immediate area, but she never let him go far alone. If he wandered too close to the cave entrance, she would appear at his shoulder, her ears alert for danger. If he stayed outside too long, she would call to him in her musical language until he returned, and every night she would curl up near him with his shirt, her presence a warm comfort in the alien darkness. Marcus was beginning to realize that he was no longer just a stranded pilot waiting for rescue. Somehow, without either of them planning it, he had become part of Naira's world. She had claimed him as surely as if she'd put a collar around his neck. But the chain that bound him was made of gentleness and care rather than force, and the strangest part was how right it felt. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus felt like he truly belonged somewhere, not just as a temporary visitor or a hired hand, but as someone who was wanted and needed. The thought of rescue ship finding him was becoming less appealing with each passing day. As he watched Naira work by firelight, her silver blue fur gleaming and her golden eyes focused on her task, Marcus began to wonder if maybe being claimed wasn't such a terrible fate after all. Trust and belonging the fourth day brought with it a test that Marcus hadn't expected. He woke to find Naira breathing heavily, her usual graceful movements replaced by careful, pained steps. A gash along her left thigh leaked dark blood, and claw marks across her shoulder suggested she tangled with something big and aggressive during her morning hunt. She tried to hide her injuries, turning away when Marcus approached, but he could see the way she favored her injured leg. The proud huntress didn't want to appear weak, but Marcus had learned enough about her over the past few days to read the signs of her distress. "Hey," he said softly, approaching her the way he'd learned to approach skittish animals. "Let me help?" Naira's ears flattened against her head, and she made a low sound that might have been a protest. But when Marcus gently touched her uninjured shoulder, she didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at him with those golden eyes, and he saw something he hadn't expected: vulnerability. Marcus had basic medical training from his pilot certification, and his emergency kit contained a universal biofoam that should work on most carbon-based life forms. He guided Naira to sit on the pile of furs where she'd been keeping his shirt, and carefully began cleaning her wounds. Her fur was softer than it looked and warm to the touch. As he worked, Naira watched his face intently, as if trying to understand why he would want to help her. When he applied the biofoam to her injuries, she tensed but didn't pull away. The medication would help prevent infection and speed healing. But it would still take time for her to recover fully. There, Marcus said when he finished bandaging her wounds. That should help. Naira studied the white bandages with curiosity, then looked at Marcus again. She reached out tentatively and touched his face with one clawed finger, the gesture so gentle it made his heart skip. Then she did something that surprised him even more. She took his hand and pressed it against her cheek. Purring softly as she leaned into his touch dot, it was the first time she'd actively sought comfort from him. And Marcus felt something shift in his chest. She wasn't just protecting him anymore. She was trusting him to protect her in return. Over the next 2 days, Marcus took on more responsibilities around the cave. He learned to tend the fire, to identify which plants were safe to eat, and even to set simple snares for small game. Naira guided him patiently, using gestures and demonstrations to teach him her survival skills. In return, Marcus shared his own knowledge. He showed her how his plasma cutter could shape stone and metal, how his emergency supplies could be used in ways she'd never imagined, and how some of the technology from his crashed ship could be repurposed for their cave home. They were becoming partners, each contributing their unique skills to their shared survival. And with each passing day, the bond between them grew stronger. On the 6th day, that bond was put to the ultimate test. Marcus was gathering firewood near the cave entrance when he heard the distant whine of engines. His heart leaped with a mixture of hope and confusion. Rescue ships wouldn't sound like that, and they certainly wouldn't approach so aggressively. These engines had a harsh, predatory quality that set his teeth on edge. He dropped the wood and ran back into the cave. Calling for Naira, she appeared immediately, her injuries mostly healed, but still moving carefully. The moment she heard the engine sounds, her entire demeanor changed. Her ears pinned back, her fur stood on end, and she bared her teeth in a snarl that was purely predatory. Raiders, Marcus said, understanding immediately. Every spacer knew about the pirates who preyed. On isolated worlds, stealing whatever they could find and leaving destruction in their wake. They must have picked up the signal from his crashed ship and come to investigate. Naira grabbed his arm and pulled him deeper into the cave, toward passages he hadn't explored yet, but Marcus resisted, his mind racing. If the raiders found the cave, they would find both of them. And if they found Naira, they would either kill her or, worse, sell her to the kind of people who collected exotic aliens for entertainment. No, Marcus said firmly, pulling free from her grip. We fight? Naira's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in understanding. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded once. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Next hour was a blur of desperate preparation. Marcus retrieved every weapon he could from his crash site, the plasma cutter, a small sidearm, and several improvised explosives made from ship components. Naira gathered her own weapons, a bow that looked like it could punch through armor, spears tipped with metal points, and claws that she sharpened to razor edges. They positioned themselves in the cave entrance, using the natural choke point to their advantage. The raiders would have to come to them, and they would be ready. The first raider to appear was a scarred human with cybernetic implants and a plasma rifle. He stepped into the cave mouth confidently, expecting to find either treasure or nothing at all. Instead, he found Naira's arrow sprouting from his chest before he could even raise his weapon. The battle that followed was fierce but brief. Marcus and Naira fought as a team, each covering the other's weaknesses. Marcus's technological advantages, combined with Naira's natural hunting instincts, proved devastating against the raiders' overconfidence. When the last attacker fell, Marcus and Naira stood side by side in the cave entrance, both breathing hard and spattered with blood that wasn't their own. The immediate threat was over, but Marcus knew there would be more. Raiders traveled in fleets, and when this advance team didn't report back, others would come looking. We need to leave, Marcus said, but Naira shook her head firmly. She touched. His chest then gestured to the cave around them. This was her home, her territory. She wouldn't abandon it without a fight. Marcus understood, but he also understood the reality of their situation. They'll come back with more ships, more weapons. We can't fight a whole fleet. Naira considered this, then did something that surprised him. She took his hand and led him to the back of the cave, to a chamber he'd never seen before. The walls were covered with drawings, star maps, ship designs, and what looked like technical schematics. In the center of the room was the device he recognized, a long-range communications array cobbled together from salvaged parts, but clearly functional. "You've been calling for help," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. "All this time. You've been trying to contact someone." Naira nodded, then activated the device. Immediately, voices filled the chamber. Not human voices, but clearly intelligent communication. Her people. Her pack, her family. The conversation that followed was in her language, but Marcus could understand the urgency in her voice and the concern in the responses. When she finally ended the transmission, she turned to him with an expression he'd never seen before. Hope mixed with fierce determination. She gestured to the sky. Then to herself, then to him. Help was coming, but it would take time. And when it arrived, Marcus would have a choice to make. That night, as they waited for either rescue or more raiders, Naira did something she'd never done before. Instead of simply sleeping near him with his shirt, she curled up directly against his side, her head on his shoulder and her arm across his chest. It was the most intimate gesture she'd ever made, and Marcus understood what she was telling him. Whatever happened next, she wanted him to know that he belonged here. With her, in her world, Marcus lay awake most of the night, staring at the cave ceiling and thinking about his life before the crash. The endless routine of supply runs, but temporary. Postings, the complete lack of anyone who would miss him if he disappeared. He'd been drifting through space and through life, never really connecting with anything or anyone. Now he was lying in an alien cave with a huntress who had claimed him based on nothing more than the scent of his shirt, and he felt more at home than he ever had in his entire life. When the rescue ships arrived the next morning, they weren't human vessels. 3 sleek craft descended from the cloudy sky, their design unlike anything in human space. They landed with barely a whisper, and the beings that emerged were clearly related to Naira, the same basic body structure, the same silver blue fur, the same intelligent golden eyes, but where Naira moved with the fluid grace of a solitary hunter. These newcomers moved with the coordinated precision of a pack. They were her people, and they had come for her. The reunion was joyful, but subdued. Naira embraced her packmates, but she kept glancing back at Marcus, her expression troubled. When one of the larger males approached Marcus with obvious curiosity, Naira immediately positioned herself between them, her posture protective. The pack leader, distinguished by streaks of silver in his fur and elaborate markings on his arms, studied Marcus with keen interest. He spoke to Naira in their language, his tone questioning. Her response was firm and unwavering, and Marcus didn't need to understand the words to know what she was saying. She was claiming him, officially, in front of her entire pack. The discussion that followed was intense, with several pack members voicing what sounded like objections. But Naira stood her ground, her tail lashing with determination. Finally, the pack leader approached Marcus directly. "You," he said in heavily accented but understandable English. "You choose. Come with pack or stay with ship clan." Marcus looked at the rescue ships, then at Naira, then at the cave that had become his home. The choice should have been obvious. Return to human space, file his reports, get reassigned to another routine supply run. Resume the safe, predictable life he'd been living, but when he looked at Naira, saw the hope and fear warring in her golden eyes, the choice became clear. "I choose her," Marcus said simply. "I choose to stay." The pack leader studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He spoke to Naira again, and this time his tone was approving. Whatever test Marcus had passed, it was enough. What followed was a ceremony unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The pack members took turns marking him with their scent, officially, accepting him as part of their group. Naira was the last, and when she pressed her face against his neck and breathed in deeply, Marcus felt something click into place inside him. He belonged here, not just as a tolerated outsider, but as a true member of the pack. Naira's packed dot as the rescue ships departed, carrying news of the first successful human-pack bonding in recorded history. Marcus stood with Naira at the entrance to the cave. The raiders wouldn't be back. The pack had made sure of that. The cave was safe, their territory was secure, and their future stretched out before them like an uncharted star map. So, Marcus said, looking down at Naira as she pressed against his side, "What happens now?" She looked up at him with those golden eyes that had first captured his attention, then did something that made his heart skip. She smiled, a very human expression on her alien features. Then she took his hand and led him back into the cave, back to the pile of furs where his shirt still lay folded carefully among her most precious possessions. Back to the home they had built together, one day at a time, as the alien sun set over their new world. Marcus realized that sometimes the best destinations were the ones you never planned to reach. Sometimes belonging found you when you weren't looking for it. And sometimes being claimed by someone who thought you were worth keeping was the greatest gift in the universe. He was no longer a drifting pilot with no permanent connections. He was Naira's chosen one, her partner, her pack mate, and that shirt she had taken on their first meeting, it had become the symbol of something much more important than simple attraction. It had become the symbol of home.